This is Temple Israel in Sag Harbor, New York, the oldest synagogue on Long Island. It describes itself outside of New York City. It began as Temple Mishican Israel with its first services in 1898 for Rosh Hashonah, the Jewish New Year. Legend has it that it received its first Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, from Teddy Roosevelt. The Torah had been used when Roosevelt and his Rough Riders, after fighting in Cuba during the Spanish-American War, were quarantined for a time in Montauk. Although Roosevelt was accepting, it was a time when Jews weren't accepted on much of Long Island's South Fork. Sag Harbor's nearby villages of East Hampton and Southampton were basically off-limits to Jews. But Jews, unusually, were accepted here in Sag Harbor. Joseph Fahys built what became a watchcase factory in Sag Harbor. Here's his mausoleum in Oakland Cemetery in Sag Harbor, the biggest mausoleum in the cemetery to this date. Fahys, incidentally, was the great-great-grandfather of former Vermont Governor Howard Dean, originally from East Hampton. Fahys sought out Jewish engravers from Hungary, where engraving was a fine art among Jews. He or his representatives would meet them after they arrived on Ellis Island and bring them to Sag Harbor. This is why my grandfather and grandmother came to Sag Harbor. Here in a display case at Temple Israel are my grandfather's talis and tefillin and other articles used by Jews in prayer. My grandfather came from Hungary to Sag Harbor around 1900 to work at Fahys' Watchcase factory. My grandmother's sister had married into the Spitz family in Sag Harbor, many of whose members worked at the Watchcase factory. And here in Sag Harbor, my grandfather and grandmother met and fell in love. Hungarian Jews, like Hungarians in general, have considered themselves very special indeed. In Hungary, the food is unique, the language is very special. And the Hungarian Jews who came here to work in the Watchcase factory didn't get along with Jews who had been here in Sag Harbor from Poland and Russia and other places where Jews had been dispersed. After a time, the Hungarian Jews prayed above the Engravers Hall on Main Street in Sag Harbor, not here. And here, if you look closely, you can still see the 2 entrances and the fence down the middle of the Jewish cemetery serving Sag Harbor. Originally, the Hungarian Jews were buried on one side, the other Jews on the other. The separation finally ended after several decades. Wasn't it nuts? While Jews weren't accepted in East Hampton or Southampton, here in Sag Harbor there was this dopey split. The temple was originally Orthodox, the most traditional branch of Judaism. In the 1920s, there was a major fire in Sag Harbor, and then, in the 30s, the Depression, with Sag Harbor suffering with the rest of the nation economically. Gertrude Katz grew up in Sag Harbor during that time. Now, Gertrude, what was it like for a Jewish girl in Sag Harbor then?
Actually, it was a wonderful place to be brought up in. Everybody was of some ethnic origin. If it was Jewish, Italian, Irish, and there were a whole group of us that lived over all the stores on the main street. That was a kind of an our gang thing, but mixed, very mixed. Really, I didn't feel the difference when I was very young. It was at the onset of the war in Germany that I became very conscious of my Jewishness. It was constantly a presence with the Nazis and so on, but the community as a whole was always very good to us and very gracious. My father died when I was 10 years old, and the community was wonderful to my mother and to me. So I didn't feel the separateness. Little incidents would happen. I don't know, maybe I was in 3rd grade when I discovered that calling my grandfather Zeta was not appropriate. I didn't know that wasn't an American term. And I quickly dropped it, and he became Grandpa instead of Zeta. And I tried to, we were always welcome in everyone's homes, and as far as the religion goes, economically, we had the upper level in Sag Harbor, the middle level, the ladies that stayed home and didn't work. That was always fascinating to me. My mother waited on a lot of my friends' mothers, which I took to mean that somehow we weren't quite equal. But the Jewish community we weren't separate. We were all assimilated. We had our separate functions, where the variety store is now upstairs was one building owned by Mrs. Myers, and we had all our functions, our synagogue, Purim parties and so forth, in what was called Myers Hall upstairs. And I thought that was the most glamorous place in the world, and I thought someday maybe I could be married there. I thought that would be the epitome of, and as you roll past 5 and 10 now, and I always look upstairs and I think about those wonderful days. Jews came from all over to our little temple because we were the only one. Montauk, right through. Riverhead was the next one. So we had a big drawing crowd, and when the holidays came, they took rooms in town. There was a little Flower Hill house, I think it was on Garden Street, where people took rooms, or else their friends or neighbors put them up, because everybody walked to the synagogue in those days. You didn't ride. The women sat upstairs, and it was a very interesting. It was an interesting time, and we had a couple school teachers. We had store Raffs, the Raff family. You see his name on the outside of the cemetery. They had 4 daughters and a son who was a dentist in Hampton Bays, and they always organized the Purim parties and taught the kids their parts. And we always had one king because he was the only boy, and all of us grew up to be Queen Esther's eventually. Got that part. But as far as being a part of the community, I really never felt that separate from my friends, and was the war was the factor that was a reminder constantly of who you were.
Your mother ran a store here in Sag Harbor?
Yes. Sag Harbor, next door to the movies. She was 1930 until she died in 84. And the Sag Harbor community put the flag at half-mast at my mother's funeral, which just is an example of the wonderful feelings that we had for everybody. And it just was a wonderful time. We had a sisterhood in the temple, a group of women. May Kelman, and she's here still. She's just celebrated her 99th birthday. Husband was a dentist, very active. Louise Spitz, Arthur Spitz's wife, and Arthur were very active in the temple. And they were all very important parts. And we used to do a dinner in Bowdoin Square every year. And everybody came and supported us. It was important for us to support the churches and the church followers to support us. We counted on each other. We couldn't exist without each other. And even now I see the churches are in a lot of trouble because some people don't give to them and don't support them. And it's really sad that we've lost that fundraiser. We had cake sales then. We graduated and went to cakeless cake sales. Just send your money and don't bother to bake a cake. It was very good. It was very worthwhile and fun.
The Jews were so welcome in Sag Harbor, but like in Southampton, East Hampton, that was another story.
No. Southampton, there was no place for the Jews. Actually, that is why Hampton Bays became a thriving community. They went to Hampton Bays. It was known that East Hampton was in a class by itself. I don't really know what was going on there, but then eventually, yes, that's how we split. East Hampton got Jews, and they broke off from our little temple, and they got the big Jewish center. They not only got Jewish people, but they got the big money.
And one of your favorite teachers was Pop Mazzio?
Pop Mazzio, who's a legend in Sag Harbor. He was the music teacher, I would say forever, and he was the reason you have a community band here now. And Pop Mazzio didn't graduate college. He was not a teacher. He taught us all music in school. And the way he taught was, he would put the music in front of you, and then da-da-da-da-da, he would hum it. And that's how we would play it. And we all played it, and we had a great band. And coming into 9th grade, one day Pop Mazzio asked me to stay after our band rehearsal, and he went to the closet and he took out the drum major uniform and the big baton. He said, "This is for you. You will now be drum major." He spoke with a very thick accent, but we all understood him very clearly. And I said, I couldn't get it. Why he was giving me this honor? He said, when you were a little girl, my wife and I were in your store, and your father said someday he would like to see his daughter lead that band. And even though your father died those many years ago, I never forgot that. And you're old enough now you will lead the band. That's my Sag Harbor story.
And Gertrude, this is your family's stop before they came to Sag Harbor, Greenport.
Greenport. My mother came from Greenport. And this was my grandfather. He was a tailor. And I might say he was one of probably a dozen tailors in Greenport. There wasn't clothing ready to wear in those days. The people had them made or made it themselves. And he was a tailor, and he started out, then later went into ready-to-wear and the retail clothing shop. But this was his picture in front of his tailor shop in Greenport many, many years ago. This shows my mother and father in the shop. It was a ladies' clothing store. They started with ladies' clothing and eventually went to dry goods and children's and menswear. But this was their original store in March 1930. And you'll notice the racks, the way the clothes were displayed was differently than they do now. And this was the two of them in March 1930. The building is still next door to the movies in Sag Harbor.
In the early 1940s, the temple was only open on High Holy Days. Change occurred in 1948 as Sag Harbor was discovered by artists and writers and young professionals, and the temple became conservative, the middle branch between Orthodox and the most liberal Jewish branch, Reform. In 1938, its name was changed to Temple Israel. That's when Dave Lee, after service in the British Army, arrived.
We arrived in Sag Harbor at 10 o'clock at night, and the only light we saw was in the Paradise on Main Street. And I knocked on the door, and Teddy Roosevelt, the owner of the place, was just cleaning up, it closed up early. And I asked him if he could provide us with a meal because we'd come a long way and we were shivering. And he made us feel very, very welcome, and I was very pleased. And I think at that time it clicked in my head, this is a darn good place to make a home. Luckily, I'm a watchmaker by trade. I got a job in the local jewelry store. And of course, as people who were brought up Jewish, one of the first things I did was look for a local synagogue. And I found the synagogue here, the oldest one on Long Island, with a hole in the roof, a coal fire furnace in the cellar, and an outhouse in the backyard. And it was in very, very poor shape. It was only used at that time on the high holidays and various odd times. But it was just before Hanukkah. So I rounded up what Jewish people I could find, and a lot of them didn't speak any English. They were from Lithuania, they were Litvaks, they were from all over the place, displaced persons from Europe. Everybody had a different prayer book, and everybody had the right prayer book, and the other was all wrong. So we got through, and then when it came to the high holidays, the following September, we had accumulated a few more Jewish people, and I ran the service, and we auctioned off the arrears, the right to come up and pray from the Torah. We auctioned them off, and we hoped to raise some money to do a little rehab on the building. And when it came to Sukkot, the following service, Nobody had any money. Everybody was broke. Sag Harbor was suffering from peace. All the factories were closed. The Grumman building, the Agawam building, was not making aircraft parts. Bolivar was not making bomb site parts anymore, and the small electronics office wasn't doing anything anymore, and it was in poor shape. Some of the stores were boarded up, and it was a very poor town. But luckily, over the years, we managed to get some industry here. We had Row Industries, and at one time, this village of ours was really an industrial town. It got so busy that those of us who ran the various plants got together and we changed our working hours so that at 5 o'clock everybody didn't come out on the street because we had total gridlock. Everybody wanted to get home. And we were very busy. Grumman had about 235, Bolivar had about 250, 275, and I had 350 people at Row. We even had people coming by bus. We ran a special bus from Riverhead. The village was so busy. And then all of a sudden, it dropped dead by dint of consolidations and purchases by different people. We lost all the plants, all of them, and we were in poor shape. And then the bright idea came, maybe we better go tourist. It's an interesting place and we see what we can do. So I founded the Chamber of Commerce, and we got together with Chambers of Commerce and Nick Monty from Gurney's and some people from East Hampton and Southampton. We founded the Suffolk Convention and Visitors Bureau, simultaneously with one being founded in Nassau County. We got together and we founded the Long Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, and our headquarters was at Roosevelt Raceway. And I had to go down to meetings at Roosevelt Raceway. I was chairman of that, and we helped put Sag Harbor on the map. We dug out all the history we could, and it's a beautiful little village, and we went from a blue-collar town to an open-collar town. And that way we've been growing ever since, and the synagogue became very, very busy. In those days, we only had a rabbi would come down in the summer or for the high holidays, and the place would be run by volunteers the rest of the year. But now, for the last 10 years, we have had a full-time rabbi, Rabbi Leon Morris, and he lives here with his family, his wife and 3 children. And we have a very active Hebrew school and very active lectures on Friday nights. On Friday night, a couple of weeks ago, we had every seat in this place taken, and there were 20 people upstairs. We had over 100 people on a Friday night service. It really is amazing, because when I came here, you couldn't find 100 Jewish people from Shinnecock Canal all the way to Montauk. 9/11 provided us with more permanent residents. People who lived and worked in New York and had a summer home out here converted the summer homes into regular homes and managed by today's capabilities to do their work from Sag Harbor. So we became quite an active village, and we're very pleased with the progress we have had. And that just about brings us up to date on where we are now. We replaced the furnace. We have some absolutely beautiful stained glass windows, which were done by a local artisan who gave us some really artistic pieces. Her name is Romney Cremora. She has a studio in the village.
Don Katz was president of Temple Israel through much of the 50s, 1950s, 1960s.
1960.
It was a different time. The temple didn't have a full-time rabbi?
Absolutely not. We had a part-time rabbi. We either had a rabbi for the 10 to 12 Friday night services during the summer and for the high holidays. But almost always, since the temple was started in 1895, the high holidays, we've always had a rabbi. Almost always.
Then an uptick of sorts occurred in Sag Harbor in terms of, well, Jewish population and Jewish activity at the temple.
No question about it. More Jews moved out here. They wanted more. And so the temple activity have increased. The rabbi is a wonderful rabbi, Leon Morris now, and his wife Darcy. And he's a full-time rabbi. And that's unusual for our temple, because up till him becoming a full-time rabbi, we only had a part-time rabbi.
Jews have been welcomed for a long time in Sag Harbor. On the other hand, in Southampton and East Hampton, there's been a different story. Why is that?
Well, Sag Harbor was a working class people. The factories were in this town. They were craftsmen. And the first Jews to come here, not the first, but the bulk of the first Jews who came in 1895 came as craftsmen. They came to work in the silverworks factory, and they fit right in with the craftsmen of the town. And what is wonderful about our temple is that when it was needed, these craftsmen built it themselves. They were the electrician, the plumber, the lumber people. They actually built that temple. And the only temple that they could build it for was the temple they had left in Europe. So our little temple is a replica of what they left. And in our temple, a few years back, we uncovered the mikveh. Now, the mikveh is a religious bath, and you use rainwater to fill that bath. We uncovered it where it was, and they built it. So I'm very proud of our temple. It wasn't an American temple built for the Jews. It was the Jewish temple that they brought from Europe that they actually built, and that's what we represent right now.
You said silverworks factory. You mean Watchcase factory?
No, the first was a silverworks factory.
Really?
Right. They used to make silverware, not silver.
Where was that? Is that?
That's in the same place. The Watchcase factory came afterwards.
Oh. So the migration would be silversmiths working at.
Right. Fahys, was it Gertrude Fahys? Silverworks factory, right? Yes. And they were brought into Sag Harbor to become employees in that town. And so they assimilated with all the other craftsmen, whether they were Italian, Irish, didn't make a difference. They could work with their hands. And they weren't wealthy, and they weren't second generation or third or fourth or fifth. They were workers. And anytime you wanted a job from Southampton or East Hampton, you came to Sag Harbor to get a job.
You've raised with Gertrude 4 children, and you have 9 grandchildren?
That is true, sir. And each one gets better and better. I'm sorry we had to stop after a while.
In the 1950s, through the rest of the 20th century and into the 21st, Temple Israel grew. Its rabbis were prominent in Jewry and included Paul Steinberg, longtime dean and vice president of Hebrew Union College, the educational center for Reform Judaism. Sort of like having a bishop preside at a country church. But Rabbi Steinberg was part-time, as were the other rabbis, including George Lieberman and Arthur Gilbert, and finally Leon Morris, Rabbi Steinberg's student at Hebrew Union. Rabbi Steinberg told me Leon Morris was his best student. The congregation only met from the spring festival of Shavuos, commemorating Moses receiving the Torah, and also a festival involving the first fruits, to the high holy days of Rosh Hashonah and Yom Kippur in the fall. Then in 2010, Rabbi Morris, after 10 years at Adas Israel part-time, became full-time. He moved to Sag Harbor with his wife, Dossie Berkowitz, who became the temple's educational consultant. And the temple, as it says on its website, became renewed and reinvigorated. Rabbi Morris, Jews and Sag Harbor, it's been a welcoming place for Jews.
It has been, I think, in many ways. From what I understand about the history, this is sort of, in general, the history of Jews in America. Jews came here straight from Ellis Island. There were job opportunities here, but they were able to create a Jewish community for themselves, a synagogue. That synagogue was supported by non-Jewish residents from Sag Harbor. I think it was a kind of idyllic existence here.
Your vision for Temple Adas Israel?
Well, this area has changed a great deal since 1898 when the synagogue was established. And there is now a very interesting combination of populations who are coming out here. There's increasing numbers of year-round residents, and among them, an increasing Jewish community. There are weekenders, more and more people from the city who decide to come out almost throughout the entire year on the weekends. And then, of course, there's the summer population. So the timing has been very positive for us to have more ambitious and expansive goals for this synagogue.
Before coming here, you created the Skirball Center in Manhattan, which was, well, basically an educational center for Judaism. And you've done a lot here in terms of arranging lectures and classes and programs. That whole zone of Jewish education is something that, well, again, you seem to be very committed to.
Mm-hmm. Well, the word rabbi means teacher, and I had initially thought that my own rabbinate would really be in the realm of Jewish education and that I wouldn't have a pulpit. I kind of fell into this almost by accident, or maybe one could say by divine providence. And I enjoy the multiplicity of roles that a congregational rabbi plays, particularly in a wonderful community like this in Sag Harbor. Teaching formally and informally is not a small part of what I'm doing here as well.
There's an interesting story as to how, I think it was on a bicycle, you came across this very building, this temple.
Yeah. So I was on a bike trip around the Hamptons with a friend of mine who is also a rabbi. He's now a rabbi in Raleigh, North Carolina. And we just stumbled upon the synagogue. I don't know why. We were coming from East Hampton. We were on 114. We happened to take a left on Elizabeth Street, and we couldn't believe it. It was like, of course, two rabbinical students are going to run into a synagogue in a small village on the east end of Long Island just by happenstance. That's what happened. We actually took a photograph. I have to find the photo, but somewhere I have a photo of the two of us standing in front of this synagogue. We got somebody to take for us, and we thought it was hilarious. And little did I know at that moment that I would be coming out here first for many years, for more than a decade in the summers, and then ultimately I'd be moving here and raising my family here.
And you also realized that, as you told me earlier, this was Rabbi Steinberg's synagogue.
Yeah. So he was one of our teachers. At the point that he was my teacher, he had already been the dean for many years at Hebrew Union College in New York and had moved on to become one of the vice presidents. But he was our teacher for pastoral counseling. And again, we were just sort of struck by what a small and interconnected world this is.
Now, another emphasis by you here has been, well, working ecumenically in this community.
Yeah, I mean, this is like many communities. There's a wonderful relationship here between rabbis and ministers and priests, and we've had a very active clergy group since I arrived here. And that's been a real source of nourishment, and we've done joint programs with local congregations, and those are relationships that I value very much, and I know the congregation does as well. We have an Interfaith Thanksgiving service each year on the Sunday prior to Thanksgiving. We hosted it, our synagogue last year. We together planned a commemorative observance for the 10th anniversary of September 11th. It's a very, very good, supportive group of colleagues.
You grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, so being in Sag Harbor, I would imagine, would be, well, something you're comfortable with.
I discovered in Sag Harbor a small town very different in many ways from the small town I grew up in. I grew up in kind of the Pennsylvania Rust Belt, Connellsville, Pennsylvania, about 60 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. And, Sag Harbor is a small town, and it's actually smaller than Connellsville. The town I grew up in had 12,000 residents. But this is such an unusual place. This is a small town filled with writers and poets and painters and organic farmers. And there's a much stronger cultural connection to the most exciting things about the city, even though we're 100 miles east of the city. Where I grew up was pretty disconnected from any kind of art or literature. So I sort of, after 18 years of living in Manhattan, I came to see that not all small towns are the same, and this is a very, very special place.
There is now a thriving Hebrew school, all sorts of cultural activities and events, many directed at young people. Jessica, you come to services here at Temple Adas Israel. I mean, you're very serious about your Judaism. What does Judaism mean to you?
Well, I go to a Jewish school, so obviously it's a huge part of my identity. You know, I speak Hebrew, and I love to sing Jewish music as well in choir, and it's so nice to have a spiritual home out here in the Hamptons.
When you come here, I mean, you're here sometimes, well, a lot of times on Saturday morning for the services and for Friday evening. What kind of, how can I put it, connects you to the observance of Judaism?
Well, I participate in the singing, and sometimes I lay in here, and I'm actually gonna sing with the Cantor Amanda tonight, so I'm excited for that. And sometimes I get an aliyah, but other times I just sit and enjoy the show.
Among young people, your contemporaries, young people you know, I mean, there's been a concern through the years. Are we, I mean, this, all religions, I think, have this concern. Are we reaching our young people? Are we, extending our faith through young people? Among young people you know, are a lot also interested in Judaism?
Well, in my community, because I go to a Jewish school, I know so many Jewish young people who are interested in their religion, and I think a lot of those people have a real connection with God, and hopefully they'll be able to perpetuate the religion for many generations.
Has it been the Jewish educational experience, your family, your own initiative, or all above that's gotten you committed to Judaism?
I think it's a combination of all those things, and a lot of also all of the institutions that I have available that are able to help me pursue my Jewish endeavors.
What's your favorite thing about Temple Adas Israel?
It's just so warm here, and you know, there's no pressure to act a certain way or do anything specific in terms of practicing Judaism, but they allow you to practice Judaism in a way that's comfortable for you, and at the same time help you to find what God means to you in your soul.
And when you say comfortable to you, what's comfortable to you?
Well, I keep kosher, so that's a huge part of my identity, and but like I don't keep Shabbos in a lot of ways that people think is acceptable, but I try to always think about God and do what's the best I can.
How old are you, Jessica?
I'm 17.
Because so many young Jewish people, after their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah when they're 13, goodbye synagogue, but not you.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to carry on the tradition.
And what don't you do on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, that you mentioned before? You don't exactly follow all the rules.
Well, some people don't use electricity on Saturday and Friday night, and I do, but to each his own.
Amanda Kleinman is the student cantor at Temple Adas Israel. Now, Amanda, you're originally from, of all places, Texas.
That's right.
What does Sag Harbor kind of mean to you, and Temple Adas Israel mean to you? Different from where you grew up?
It is. It's very different here from where I grew up. I've really loved being here. I grew up at a very large congregation in Dallas, and this is a totally different environment. I love kind of the Hamishness of this congregation, and what a kind group of people this is, and I've really loved being here.
When you grew up in Texas, Dallas, there's a large Jewish population in Dallas.
Right.
Was it an amicable relationship between the Jews and non-Jews? Or did you, I mean, people from New York think of the West or the South and Texas as perhaps there being some hostility towards Jews?
You know, it's funny because I actually grew up in a Jewish day school, and then I went to a secular high school, but it turned out that almost a quarter of the school was Jewish. And so it was a school that really valued diversity. And I found the Jewish population in Dallas to be, or the general population of Dallas to be very welcoming towards the Jewish population.
You committed yourself to become a Cantor. Why?
So I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish school, and I always had a real connection to my Judaism and always had a real connection to Jewish tradition and Jewish text. And as I got older, I became more and more interested in music, and I went to college and majored in music. And it just sort of hit me one high holidays that the two things that I loved most would combine very well in a career in the Cantor. So it was really a very natural decision for me.
You're a student at Hebrew Union College. Now, you went to an Orthodox school originally.
Mm-hmm.
Hebrew Union is Reform. How come you chose Reform over Orthodox or conservative?
Well, my parents and my grandparents both grew up in the Reform movement, so I've always had a very strong connection to Reform Judaism. And ideologically, I really believe in what it is that the Reform movement does. I really respect the fact that people are able to make their own decisions about how Judaism is going to be the most meaningful for them, and that the rest of the community is going to be very supportive of that. And that's the kind of community in which I feel the most comfortable.
Now, you're also very serious about Jewish learning. I mean, you're involved now in a postgraduate degree. The program you're involved with now.
So I took a year off from the cantorial program to study at a non-denominational women's yeshiva, the Drisha Institute for Jewish Education in New York City. It was a year of intensive text study. We did Talmud and biblical commentaries and Jewish law. And text is a real passion of mine because I feel like if I'm going to make choices about how I'm going to practice Judaism, that I need to be informed about the choices that I'm making. And so this year of getting to learn about why I'm making the decisions I'm making was very meaningful for me.
You eventually want to be a cantor at, they don't call it like a pulpit rabbi, they don't call it a pulpit cantor, no?
You know, I think that there are different kinds of opportunities for cantors. Most, do end up in pulpit situations, but there are other kinds of opportunities. And I do see myself ending up in a synagogue situation. That's something that I would love, but I would definitely be open to a lot of different kinds of situations.
Now, you've been very involved with Israel. You've in fact gone on, it's called Birthright, where young Jewish people are, they take a trip to Israel, and you've been, what would be your role, not a counselor, but what was your function in these Birthright trips?
Well, I went on a Birthright trip this summer after my first year of college, and I just had the most incredible experience, and it really caused a really special love of Israel for me. I spent a semester studying abroad in Israel, and then I spent my first year of cantorial school in Israel, and I really wanted to share my love of Israel with other people. And so last December, I staffed a Birthright trip. I was one of the leaders of a Birthright trip. So I took a group of 22 to 27-year-olds from all around the country for a trip to Israel for 10 days, and we it was really like an introduction to Israel. It was mostly people who were in Israel for their first time, and it was a really, really special experience for me.
Services at Temple Israel feel like celebrations. On Friday evenings, playing piano and organ is Keelan Watlington. Keelan adds to the service in an extraordinary way, playing traditional Jewish music, which fills half the service with great verb and a good dose of jazz. Keelan isn't Jewish, and it's something to not only listen to Keelan render centuries-old Jewish melodies in his special way, but to watch him as he plays, moving with great energy, which complements the energy of the music. He's the Ray Charles of Jewish music.
And 137. few moments before L'Chadodi and individually try to recapture some significant memories of the past week. Before we do so, I just wanted, in sort of a free associative way, to share just two memories of from the congregational life this past week, both of which were on Monday. On Monday afternoon, we buried in our cemetery dozens and dozens of old prayer books and humashim, which could no longer be used. And it's a very interesting thing that we Jews do in not consigning sacred books, which no longer serve a useful or functional purpose, to the garbage. We can't bear to just throw away the books that express the hopes and dreams and yearnings of the generation, or in some cases generations, that use them. And so we lovingly bury them. We We dug a plot close to 114. That would be, let's say, a less desirable plot to purchase.
Meanwhile, Sag Harbor itself is being renewed and reinvigorated with that Watchcase factory, the centerpiece. After sitting as a big, derelict building for decades, it's being renovated as a luxury complex called the Watchcase. A new centerpiece of the revival of Sag Harbor is this project, the Watchcase project. And with me is David Cronin of Cape Advisors, involved in this huge project.
Yeah, we've been involved in this project since 2006. We went through a 2.5-year entitlement process with the village of Sag Harbor, almost 70 public hearings with the various boards. And the idea was that we wanted to restore the Watchcase factory to its former glory and integrate it back into the fabric of Sag Harbor, into the fabric of the community.
The history of the Watchcase factory.
So the Watchcase factory, the cornerstone was laid by Joseph Fahys in 1881. It operated under the Joseph Fahys Watchcase factory for some time. Ultimately, it was purchased by Bulova. Bulova ran their operations here until 1981, and then the Watchcase factory has sat vacant from 1981 until really when we purchased it in 2006, and ultimately broke ground in the fall of 2011 after all the entitlements were in place and after we closed on our construction financing.
Now, one of the first, extraordinary aspects of this structure, all the windows. I mean,
there are close to 700 windows between the factory building and the new townhomes that we are constructing as well. And we can go up and I'll show you the model unit, but in the one residence alone, there's over 25 windows. I think there's 28 windows in the one unit. And the nice thing is you get, most of the units have at least 2 exposures of light. So you've got this dimension of about 24 feet between the load-bearing masonry walls. And back in 1881, when the building was operating as a Watchcase factory, they relied on the natural light. So that was one of the reasons they had so many windows, is because the workers needed light in order to perform their job duties.
As you know, my grandfather, like many Hungarian Jews who came to Sag Harbor way back, a century back, worked in the Watchcase factory. You're Jewish.
Yeah.
How does it feel renovating something that was, this great center for Jewish working people way back then? Yeah,
I mean, it's amazing. In the 10 years or so I've been spending here in Sag Harbor, everyone you run into who grew up here, who had family that grew up here, in some way is tied to this building. So whether their grandmother or their parents or they work there, it's amazing. And to bring this building back to life, after so many years of neglect, is something that we're so excited about.
Oh, and I didn't mention, or I didn't think to mention about the windows, the purpose of having all these windows.
The purpose of the windows was to bring the natural light into the building before there was electricity, because the building was built in 81. There wasn't electricity for the workers to be working, so they would rely on the natural light. And if you notice that the sills are quite high, so they had desks and workstations that were under the windows, which allowed the natural light to flood in and let them perform their job duties. What we've done is we've tried to maintain as much of the fabric of the factory building as possible. So all of these beautiful old growth southern yellow pine beams, we clean them up with a walnut blasting technique. So typically what you would do is you'd sandblast them to clean them up. And walnut blasting, with ground up walnut shells, is actually a much less abrasive and much more environmentally friendly technique. So we came in and we literally blasted these beams with ground up walnut shells to restore them back to their original patina. This is our model residence, which was designed by Stephen Gambrell, our interior designer. And this is a 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath, 2,000 square foot unit. It's got the open loft, kitchen, living, dining area, and it's got a private roof terrace overlooking the bay. And we can go up there in a minute. I'll show you spectacular views of the water. And as you see, you know, what we wanted to do here was really embrace the fabric of the factory building. You know, we kept the exposed brick. We try to utilize all of the exposed beams wherever we can. You know, and some of the industrial aspects, such as these steel brackets that are supporting the beams, you know, we didn't want to hide those. We wanted to, you know, expose them and, you know, let the fabric of the factory building become the patina of these apartments. You know, all of the penthouse residents will have wood-burning fireplaces. They all have this wide plank oak flooring. You know, you could see the natural light that floods into these apartments with the 28 window openings just in this one unit. You know, we've got our 2-inch thick marble countertops, obviously the top of the line stainless steel appliances, and our oak cabinetry, which was made in Italy. This is a private roof terrace for the model apartment. Every single unit in the factory building has private outdoor space. So the ground floor units will have gardens at grade. All of the rooftop units have, or penthouse units have rooftop terraces, and there's a few balconies and terraces that we've added. And you know, this is a third floor penthouse unit. You could see the spectacular view of the bay. And when you go up one floor higher, I mean, you really have this sweeping view of the bay, which really comes around. And you know, these units will have your outdoor built-in outdoor kitchen. We have this green roof concept, which was one of the environmental sustainability features of this project, to capture runoff and rainwater, and it also provides a nice plush environment for these roof terraces.
And you can see, I mean, it's utterly amazing. The view, I mean, there's the municipal building in Sag Harbor. In fact, Sag Harbor, it looks, you look at Main Street, like a little set from a model railroad set. And there's Shelter Island. And I mean, my grandfather, I think, would be flabbergasted as to what you've done with his old factory.
We're here in the master bedroom of the model apartment, which was furnished and designed by Stephen Gambrell. And you see the exposed wooden beams, these old growth southern yellow pine beams, which we think are a really important part of the patina of the factory building that we've tried to maintain in as many rooms as possible. You've got the master bedroom closet and the master bath, which has 5 fixtures. We've developed this wet room concept, which has the integrated tub and shower together, the double vanity, cabinetry that was made in Italy. These are custom designed waterworks fixtures, which I don't know if you can see here, has this screw band, which is reminiscent of like a Cartier watch or like an industrial aspect of the factory building. So Waterworks custom designed all of that for this project and has a separate Watchcase line now that This is the walk-in closet for the master bedroom, and these can be configured any way that a buyer would like. This particular one for the model unit was built out by a local mill worker here in the Hamptons, East End Country Kitchens, but these can really be configured to any way the buyer would like it. The guest bedroom.
And David, for viewers who might be interested in this, it's a condominium complex.
It is a condominium, yeah. We have a website which has all the information, watchcasefactory.com, and that has all the renderings, floor plans, and links to our sales and marketing team if they want more information or to schedule a tour through the model apartment.
Neil Fagan is the current president at Temple Mishican Israel, and
it feels like I've been president for a long, long time, and I have been probably in the order of 16 years.
How has the synagogue changed in those 16 years? There's been big changes, a full-time rabbi and so forth. What else?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I was elected president of a part-time synagogue, and my duties were really over the summer. But this has escalated, and now I'm busy year-round as being president since we have a full-time rabbi. When I first got started here, we really occasionally had a service with a lay leader in the winter, Most of our services were in the summer. Rabbi Steinberg was here for that time, and we always had a student cantor. But now this temple is busy year-round. You can come in the middle of the winter on a Wednesday night. There's something going on. Come in a snowy afternoon. There are kids running around. It's really just a wonderful evolution.
What was the thing that kind of kicked off this, kind of explosive growth here at the synagogue?
I'm sure you've heard this before, but our rabbi is very, very dynamic, and he doesn't sit still for a minute. So there are constantly new programs, new ideas, and we're really, instead of being a middle-aged and older synagogue, we have many, many young people here with young kids. There are programs for toddlers, 6-year-olds, and then our bar mitzvah and bas mitzvah class is wonderful just to see all these 20-some-odd students here a couple times a week.
What's your vision at this point for Temple Israel?
I'm not a visionary. I love the temple the way it is. I would hate to see us lose this small town image that we have. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't want to see a big building. I love this little shul. I'm happy.
The other thing about this temple is the Yiddish word hamisha, for, how would you translate it? Plain and simple, kind of honest, nothing fancy. And that's sort of...
It's sort of like a good feeling in your stomach when you have hot chocolate. This is... When you come here on a Friday night, we all feel good. It's like our own little private community. After services, the people that want to clean up the place have to wait around because no one wants to leave. It's just a wonderful feeling. It's a wonderful community.
The juxtaposition of the synagogue and Sag Harbor. I mean, you're not originally from Sag Harbor, right?
No, but it feels like. Sag Harbor's been my home for many, many years. My family brought us here in the 50s by boat. I continued the family tradition. I had a boat and lived on a boat in Sag Harbor for the summers for years and years. In fact, before we built our house here, we lived on the boat 6 months a year in Sag Harbor. I forgot the question, so you're going to have to remind me of the question.
The juxtaposition of Sag Harbor and the Jewish community, Temple Israel. I mean, what's the, how can I put it, the equation, the relationship, Sag Harbor and Jewish people?
Well, it's like we have a Pied Piper here. When you're in a minority, Jewish people tend to stick together. That's my opinion. So with the temple here, people started coming and they liked it, and more people came. So we expect an overflow for the holidays this week, in 3 weeks.
You grew up near, I think, in Lynbrook, right?
Yes, I grew up in Lynbrook, though my wife said I never grew up. And I belong to a temple called Temple Emmanuel, where Rabbi Harold Saperstein was the rabbi, and people flocked to that temple because he was a wonderful rabbi. And I haven't had anything in between that I flocked to until I got involved here at Temple Israel.
There's another Jewish congregation serving Sag Harbor, the Conservative Synagogue of the Hamptons. It was founded by people seeking a more conservative approach to Judaism. It met for years at the First Presbyterian Church of Sag Harbor, also known as the Old Whalers Church, and recently moved to the Unitarian Universalist Meeting House south of Sag Harbor in Bridgehampton. What would my grandfather and grandmother say now? All their families, my family, were murdered in the Holocaust. I think they would smile about Jews being accepted in this golden land, especially Sag Harbor. I'm Carl Grossman reporting for WVVH-TV. Thank you for watching.